I always thought we had a strong marriage, the kind that you could count on like an old, trusted friend. I'm Tom Richards, a steady man, set in my ways, who never wanted anything more than a quiet, happy life. 15 years of marriage to my wife, Ashley, two beautiful daughters, a nice house, and a good neighborhood. It was all I'd ever hoped for. But recently, something started to feel off, like a creak in the floorboards or a loose brick in what I thought was a solid foundation. Ashley works as a real estate agent. She's good at what she does, always been a people person with a talent for turning on the charm. She's ambitious too, loves the thrill of the deal, and I've always admired her drive. But sometimes I'd catch this tone in her voice, what I call her realtor voice, and see a smirk that, for some reason, didn't sit right with me. I try to laugh it off, telling myself it was just her business side. After all, everyone's got their quirks, and a bit of charm never hurt anyone. But still, that nagging feeling stayed like a quiet whisper at the back of my mind. Maybe I'd been too content, too trusting, ignoring the little things, the extra hours she'd been spending out showing properties, or the late-night work seminars. She always had a reason, and I had no reason not to believe her. She'd come home tired, with that familiar realtor smile in place, saying how great her career was going, how she was getting closer to closing big deals. And I believed it. I believed her. But after a while, her absences became harder to ignore. Sometimes she'd be gone all day, saying she had clients to meet or properties to show. She'd come home late, offer some offhand explanation about work demands, and I'd brush off my doubts, chalking it up to her career. I mean, this was the woman I married, the mother of our children. If there was anything I knew in this world, it was that I could trust her. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. Because that's what you do in a marriage, right? You trust. You give the benefit of the doubt. It was about a month ago when I started to see things a little more clearly. You could say that reality hit me hard one Monday morning, right around 10 a.m., in a way that I'd never seen coming. I was at my annual checkup, just a routine appointment, something I did every year. But this time it was different. The doctor sat me down and told me I'd tested positive for gonorrhea. I remember feeling like my entire world spun sideways. Gonorrhea? I couldn't even comprehend what he was telling me. I'd never been with anyone but Ashley, never even thought about it. I asked the doctor if he was sure. I must have sounded like some clueless kid, because he gave me that pitying look that made it clear he was serious. That was the moment when doubt planted itself, deep and cold, in my chest. After leaving the doctor's office, I sat in my car for what felt like an eternity. The diagnosis replayed in my mind over and over: gonorrhea. The word seemed foreign, like something out of a stranger's life, not mine. My head spun as I thought about Ashley, about the life we'd built, about the trust I'd poured into her for 15 years. How could something like this happen in a marriage that, in my mind, was as solid as bedrock? As I gripped the steering wheel, I felt a new weight settle over me, a cold, heavy realization that there were things about my life I didn't understand, things that had been right in front of me, hidden in plain sight. But I wasn't about to be played for a fool. I'd start with the facts, no assumptions, no accusations, just hard proof. If Ashley was betraying me, she was going to be the one to face the truth head on. Back home, I paced the house, my mind racing. It was quiet, the kids at school, and Ashley out for another showing. But this time I didn't believe it. My mind combed over everything she'd said in the past months, picking apart each excuse, each late night, each early morning appointment. I thought of her cell phone, the way she'd started carrying it everywhere, even to the bathroom. For years, we'd shared everything. Now, the very woman who'd promised me loyalty and partnership was keeping parts of herself hidden away, just out of reach. When she finally got home that night, I played my part perfectly. I didn't let on that I knew anything. She greeted me with a smile, her realtor's mask firmly in place, and went about her evening as if nothing was different. But my mind was reeling. I felt like I was living with a stranger. The next morning, I started gathering evidence. Ashley was meticulous with our family finances, which had always worked for me. I'd never been one to worry about the details of household expenses. But now, I took a hard look at our financial records. It wasn't long before I found something off, a series of charges I couldn't explain. There were hotel stays, luxury restaurant bills, and even a transaction at a spa, none of which she'd ever mentioned. I knew I needed someone who could get to the bottom of this, someone who wasn't involved emotionally. That's when I decided to call Jack, a private investigator I'd heard of through a friend. Jack had a reputation for being relentless, for getting the truth out in the open, no matter how deeply it was buried. And that was exactly what I needed, the truth. Sitting across from Jack a day later, I laid it all out for him. The sudden absences, the evasive answers, the suspicious charges. Jack listened, his eyes never leaving mine, and I could tell he understood. There was no pity in his look, only a readiness to get to work. "Give me a few days," he said. "I'll get you what you need." For the next several days, I went through the motions, my mind churning over what Jack would find. Ashley was as oblivious as ever, laughing at my jokes, tucking the girls in, chatting away about her workday, as if everything was normal. It was almost impressive, watching how well she hid her secrets. I felt like I was seeing her for the first time. The real her, the woman who could lie through her teeth while I sat across from her, listening to her every word. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. A few days later, the call came. Jack had information. I drove to his office, trying to keep my hand steady on the wheel. When I arrived, he ushered me into his office, his expression serious. "Tom," he said, closing the door, "I'm going to be straight with you. Your suspicions were right." He laid out the details. Ashley had been meeting with another man, a client, a guy named Brad, at least once a week, sometimes even twice. Jack handed me photos, text transcripts, and receipts. There was proof. She hadn't just betrayed me once. She'd been living a whole other life, carrying on this affair for months, maybe longer. But the worst part? Jack had managed to capture one of her conversations with Brad. She'd laughed about me, mocked me, calling me a straight-laced fool and a boring family man. She told Brad I was too small-minded to understand her needs, and even mentioned the money she was hiding, how she was setting herself up just in case. Just in case what? I thought. Just in case she decided to throw away everything we'd built together? Just in case she finally decided she'd had enough of our boring life? I sat there, staring at the evidence, feeling a rage I'd never known. The woman I'd loved, supported, built a life with, she had no respect for any of it. She had no respect for me. The next few hours after Jack's call were a blur. I drove home, the anger I'd been carrying finally settling into something sharper, something colder. I had all the proof I needed. Every text, every email, every lie and betrayal, laid out in undeniable evidence. Jack had done his job well, maybe even too well. It felt like the universe itself was mocking me for trusting Ashley, for believing in a woman who'd turned our life into a sham. Back home, I stood in the quiet of our living room, looking around at everything we'd built. The family photos on the walls, the girls' drawings pinned to the refrigerator, even Ashley's favorite flowers, still fresh in the vase by the window. All of it suddenly felt hollow. It was like the home I thought I'd known, the life I thought was mine, had evaporated, leaving only a ghost of a memory. That night, Ashley came in late. She texted me earlier, saying she'd be working on a big sale and to go to bed without her. But I'd stayed up, watching the door, waiting for her. When she finally walked in around 11, she looked exactly the same as she had every other night she'd come home late. That same smile, the same polished realtor look, friendly and professional, the practiced face she wore in public. She probably thought I'd never catch on, that I'd be too boring and straight-laced to even suspect. But not tonight. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice bright, almost cheerful. She shrugged off her jacket and set her purse on the counter, barely glancing at me. "Sorry I'm late. It was a long day, but I think we've got the client ready to sign." I didn't react, just kept my eyes on her steady. Her words were empty now, little more than noise in the background. She was going on about the deal, and how she'd been bending over backward for some tough clients. Watching her lie so effortlessly made my skin crawl. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. There was a plan to finish, a plan she'd never see coming. For the next few days, I watched her like a hawk. Every time she walked through the door with that bright smile and friendly excuses, I took mental notes. I let her spin her stories, feeding her just enough attention to keep her comfortable. But inside, I was mapping out every step, setting up everything I'd need to ensure that she couldn't run from the consequences of her actions. If she thought I'd just take it, she didn't know me at all. The first step was the money. With the account details Jack had found, I logged into her secret account. There it was, sitting there, the money she'd been siphoning off from our life together, tucked away just in case she decided to cut and run. And she had done it bit by bit, small enough amounts to avoid suspicion, but over time, it had grown into something big. Something that was mine too. I transferred half of it into a separate account under my name. It wasn't a move she'd overlook for long, but I wasn't worried. This was only the beginning, and I'd left enough there to keep her unsuspecting a little longer. The amount I'd taken would go to our daughters. Ashley might be ready to tear our family apart, but I'd make sure the girls would never have to face the fallout of her mistakes. Next, I called Jack to make sure everything he'd gathered was in order. The texts, the photos, even the receipts. Jack, I said, I need every single detail. Organized, labeled. I don't want her to be able to deny a single thing. He promised he'd have it delivered in a way she'd never see coming. 2 days later, I picked up a package. Jack had outdone himself. There was enough there to ruin not just Ashley's reputation, but every bit of her carefully curated professional image. I thumbed through the evidence, feeling satisfaction creep in as I imagined her shock. She thought she'd hidden it all so well. She'd never expect this. First, I made sure the evidence would reach her employer. It was a quiet, almost clinical move, but I'd learned that the first blow had to be silent, unseen. I sent a copy to her boss, her high-profile clients, and even the head of her firm's local board, with instructions for them to review the attached files in confidence. No need for grand explanations. I wanted them to come to their own conclusions, to see her deception laid bare. Then I went further. I sent another round of packets, this time to her closest colleagues, friends, and even her family. No accusations, no calls for sympathy. Just the facts. Let her face the whispers, the questioning looks. I wanted her to deal with the damage she'd caused, to watch as every person who'd once admired her saw her for who she really was. Finally, I called her parents. I'd known them for years, trusted them like family. They were good people, and they deserved to know that their daughter was willing to tear our family apart for a fling or two, willing to lie to everyone who'd ever put their faith in her. I told them about the evidence, sent them the files, and waited for them to understand. It wasn't easy, and there was no satisfaction in hurting them, but it was part of the reckoning she'd earned. She'd built this lie. Now she could watch it burn. When it was all in motion, I sat back and waited. My anger had turned into something colder, something unbreakable. I'd done my part, laid out the path for her to face her own destruction, and now I waited for the fallout. Let her try to explain. Let her feel what it's like to see everything she'd taken for granted crumble beneath her. I was done being the fool. From here on out, she'd be the one on the outside, looking in, watching the life she'd taken for granted slip right out of her grasp. I planned the confrontation carefully. I wasn't going to let her sidestep this or play the innocent victim, and I wasn't about to sit around and listen to a stream of excuses. She'd been lying to my face for months, maybe longer, and I wanted her to see the man she thought she could deceive. The perfect opportunity came a week later. She was in the hospital with a minor injury from a car accident, a fender bender that had left her bruised but otherwise unharmed. She texted me from the ER, asking me to bring her things to stay comfortable while she recovered. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed her overnight bag, threw in a few essentials, and tucked in the packet of evidence I'd gathered from Jack. If she wanted a quiet night in a hospital bed, she was going to get a reality check instead. This was her doing, and it was time she faced it. When I arrived, she was propped up in bed, scrolling on her phone, looking as comfortable as if she were at home. Her face lit up when she saw me walk in. "Tom," she said, her voice soft and sweet. "Thanks for coming." I set her bag down by the bed and kept my face blank. She must have sensed something was off because her smile faltered slightly. "You don't look happy to see me," she said with a little laugh, trying to play it off as a joke. "What's wrong?" "Funny you should ask," I replied, my voice calm but steely. I pulled the packet from her bag and dropped it onto her lap. "I brought you something you're going to want to look through." She glanced down at the folder, her expression turning wary. "What's this?" "Everything I know about you, Ashley," I said, watching her closely. "Every lie, every betrayal, every meeting with Brad and the others. You're going to want to read every page." Her face drained of color, and her hands trembled as she picked up the folder, flipping it open. Her eyes scanned the pages, widening as she saw the photos, the messages, the receipts, everything laid out with brutal clarity. She looked up at me, stunned. "Tom," she whispered, her voice a strangled plea. "I can explain." "Explain?" I said, my voice sharp. "Explain how you lied to me? Explain how you mocked me to strangers? Or maybe you want to explain the secret bank account you've been funding for who knows how long. Go ahead, Ashley, I'm all ears." She stammered, her eyes darting from the papers to me and back again. "It's not what it looks like," she finally managed. "I never meant to hurt you." "Don't even start with that," I interrupted, cutting her off coldly. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think I'd find out. You thought I was too boring, too straight-laced to ever catch on, right?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked utterly defeated, as if the reality of her actions was hitting her for the first time. I watched her carefully, seeing her guilt, her shame, the way her face twisted as she tried to form an excuse, a reason, anything that might lessen the impact. But I wasn't about to let her off that easy. "I spent 15 years trusting you, Ashley," I continued, my voice low. "I built a life with you. I was faithful, committed, and this is how you repay me." She swallowed, her voice a broken whisper. "Tom, I'm sorry." Sorry." I scoffed. "If you were sorry, you would have stopped. If you were sorry, you wouldn't have laughed at me behind my back. Do you have any idea what it's like to read what you wrote? To hear how little you respect me?" Tears filled her eyes, and she looked down, unable to meet my gaze. For the first time, she seemed speechless, her usual confidence shattered. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see her mind racing, searching for an explanation that could somehow soften the impact of her betrayal. But there was nothing she could say, nothing she could do to undo the damage. "Here's how this is going to go," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I've already taken half of that little rainy day fund you've been stashing away. That money is going to our daughters, and there's nothing you can do about it. I'm filing for divorce, and I've made sure everyone knows exactly why. Your friends, your family, your colleagues, they all know the truth now. They know who you really are." She looked up at me, horror and shock written across her face. "You told them? Every single one of them?" I replied coldly. "You wanted to live a double life? Now you can live with the consequences." Her face crumpled, and she reached out a hand toward me. "Tom, please, you have to understand." "Understand?" I said, laughing bitterly. "I understand perfectly. I understand that I've wasted years on someone who couldn't be bothered to show me an ounce of respect." She slumped back in the bed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity. She'd made her choices, and now she was facing the results. I turned toward the door, pausing for a moment to look back at her. "I hope it was worth it, Ashley," I said quietly, "because this is the last time you'll ever see me." I left without another word, letting the door swing shut behind me. The echo of her quiet, desperate sobs faded as I walked down the hallway, my steps steady, my resolve unshakable. She'd wanted to live in lies, but I'd left her nothing but the truth. And now, I was finally free of her. After leaving Ashley at the hospital, I knew exactly what I needed to do. She had lied to me, laughed behind my back, and used me as a convenient cover for her double life. This wasn't about letting her off easy. No, this was about making sure every choice she'd made came back to haunt her. The first step was the money. The account details Jack had uncovered were still fresh in my mind. She'd been siphoning off cash from our household finances, padding her hidden account for who knew how long. This was the fund she'd counted on to give herself a soft landing if things ever went south. But she wasn't going to get that chance. I logged into her secret account, the password as easy as ever. For someone who thought she was clever, she hadn't taken much care to protect it. There it was, a small fortune she'd stashed away bit by bit. I didn't take all of it, no, just half. Just enough to make her squirm. I transferred my share into a trust for our daughter's education and future expenses. The rest? I left it there, with a freeze that would take her months to sort out. She'd be left with a mess of red tape and barely enough funds to keep herself afloat. With the money secured, I moved to the next stage. Her professional life had to crumble just like the rest of her. She'd built up this pristine image in the real estate world, an image of a hard-working, trustworthy professional who could do no wrong. But all it would take was a well-placed nudge to send that image crashing down. I made sure her boss got a neatly prepared package of everything I'd uncovered. Photos, receipts, copies of messages. Enough evidence to make it clear that she wasn't just a cheater, but someone who lived a double life, deceiving not only her husband, but everyone around her. Real estate is a world built on reputation, and hers was about to take a serious hit. It didn't take long. Within days, clients started canceling appointments, backing out of deals. Ashley was scrambling to do damage control, trying to assure her clients that she was still the same person they trusted. But that trust was gone, and I could see the cracks starting to form. Her sales began to slip, high-profile clients walked away, and suddenly, the career she'd prided herself on was falling apart. Next, I turned to our social circle. Friends, family, neighbors. Everyone who'd seen Ashley as the charming, confident woman she pretended to be. I wanted them to know the truth, every single detail of the lies she'd woven around us all. I sent out packets of evidence, carefully worded to avoid sensationalism, but full of enough detail to make it clear who Ashley really was. The effect was almost immediate. Friends who'd once admired her distanced themselves. Family members stopped answering her calls. The ones who'd always praised her now refusing even to look at her. She was suddenly alone in a way she'd never experienced before, isolated from the network she'd once used to boost her image. But I wasn't done yet. She'd spent months, maybe years, setting herself up, hiding behind the family she claimed to love while planning her escape. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the betrayal she'd handed me, to face every consequence she thought she could avoid. One by one, I reached out to the people she counted on most, her closest friends, her most loyal colleagues, even her parents. I showed them the truth, laid it all out in black and white. I didn't ask them to take sides or defend me. I just wanted them to see her for who she really was. And the fallout was exactly what I'd expected. Her friends turned away from her, the same people she'd confided in, laughed with, and used as alibis. Her colleagues stopped returning her calls. Even her parents, who'd once looked at her with nothing but pride, couldn't meet her gaze. She'd wanted to live a life of freedom, to shed the family and the responsibilities she'd pretended to cherish. Now she had her freedom and nothing else. I knew she'd hit rock bottom when I started getting the calls. She was desperate, leaving me messages every day, her voice pleading, cracking, begging for another chance. She claimed she was sorry, that she'd made a mistake, that she'd never meant for things to go this far. But I knew better. This wasn't regret. It was panic. She was watching everything she'd built unravel, and she couldn't handle the consequences. Her last attempt was a letter. She must have spent hours on it, pouring out every excuse, every plea, every desperate word she could think of to get me to forgive her. She begged me to remember the good times, to think of our daughters, to give her one last chance. But her words were just ink on paper, hollow and empty, as meaningless as the vows she'd broken. I didn't respond. I left her letter on my desk, a reminder of the woman I'd once loved and the betrayal she'd chosen instead. She didn't deserve an answer, didn't deserve another moment of my time. With the divorce proceedings underway, I made my final move. I'd fought for full custody, and with everything stacked against her, there was no way she'd be able to contest it. Paula made sure the agreement was airtight. She'd have minimal visitation rights, and she'd be paying child support, whether she liked it or not. I wasn't going to let her use our daughters as pawns, not after what she'd done. As the last pieces fell into place, I saw her world collapse bit by bit. Friends who'd once admired her now wanted nothing to do with her. Clients who'd once respected her now saw her as a liability. Family who'd once supported her now avoided her, ashamed of what she'd done. And Ashley, the woman who'd once stood beside me, was left with nothing but the wreckage of the life she'd chosen. Finally, she gave up. She packed what little she had left and moved out of town, leaving behind the shattered pieces of her once polished life. She couldn't face the people who knew the truth, couldn't stand the looks, the whispers, the quiet rejection from everyone who'd once praised her. She thought she could escape the consequences, start fresh somewhere new, but I knew the truth would follow her, a shadow she'd never outrun. As for me, I stayed steady, focused, determined to rebuild what she'd tried to destroy. I kept my eye on the life I wanted to create, one that didn't rely on lies, one that wasn't built on someone else's deceit. Every time I thought of her, every time I heard another whisper about her struggles, I reminded myself of what I'd done and why. She'd chosen this path, and now she'd have to walk it alone. I thought I'd put everything behind me once she left town. I'd handled things as best as I could, and while it hadn't brought any satisfaction, there was at least a sense of justice. But as it turned out, Ashley wasn't quite done with her schemes. I learned this the hard way one evening when Paula called me, her voice carrying that tone lawyers get when they know something's about to get complicated. She's filed a motion to appeal for joint custody, Paula said, sounding as surprised as I felt. I could hardly believe it. After everything, Ashley still had the nerve to try and claw back some control, to act as if she had a right to our daughters. The idea that she'd put them through a custody battle after everything she'd done, after the lies, the deceit, the neglect, was infuriating. And I wasn't about to let her get away with it. Paula assured me that we had a strong case, but this wasn't just about the legal side. It was about Ashley's desperation, her last, frantic attempt to regain some semblance of control, some foothold in the life she'd lost. I didn't want my girls to see her dragging them through court, treating them like bargaining chips. If she was looking to twist the knife one last time, she'd be in for a surprise. The court date was set, and as it approached, Paula and I worked on gathering every possible piece of evidence, building a case that would make her motives clear. I spent sleepless nights going through documents, talking to witnesses, and preparing for whatever Ashley might try to pull in the courtroom. On the day of the hearing, she showed up looking like a different person. Frazzled, pale, the confident charm that had once defined her now replaced with desperation. She hardly even looked me in the eye. I could tell she'd reached her breaking point, but I wasn't going to let sympathy sway me. Not after everything. When she took the stand, she painted herself as a loving mother, someone who just wanted to rebuild a connection with her daughters. She spoke about forgiveness and family, using every excuse and manipulation she could think of. But the evidence I'd presented painted a different picture. One of a woman who'd betrayed her family, who'd only looked out for herself. The judge saw through it, saw her act for what it was. In the end, her appeal was denied. Her motions, her manipulations, her pleas, none of it made a difference. And as the ruling was announced, she finally looked over at me, eyes empty and defeated, as if the reality of her choices was hitting her for the first time. The court officer handed me full custody paperwork, and that was it. She was truly out of our lives. But even as I walked out of that courtroom, victorious, I felt a strange sense of finality, like a heavy weight being lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't joy or triumph. It was a release, a door closing on everything she'd put us through. Our daughters would be safe, free from the lies and manipulation she'd surrounded them with. And for the first time, I could look forward to a life where her shadow wouldn't follow us. In the months after the divorce was finalized, I started to rebuild, and for the first time, I was moving forward without looking back. The man I'd been at the start of all this, trusting, maybe even naive, was gone. In his place was someone who'd faced betrayal head-on, who'd taken the life he thought he knew and set it right on his own terms. Looking back, I could see the entire journey as one sharp, painful lesson. Ashley and I had built what I thought was a solid life. 15 years of marriage, 2 beautiful daughters, a nice home, and the comfort of familiarity. But it had all been a lie, propped up by her deception and her endless need to feel important. I used to think her long hours were just dedication, her late-night meetings a part of her drive to succeed. Little did I know she was using our family life as a shield, a cover for a double life she thought I'd never question. Then came the The diagnosis I received at that doctor's appointment had sent my world spinning. It was that moment, that undeniable truth, that forced me to stop looking away from the cracks I'd noticed. The secrets, the sudden business trips, her phone constantly by her side, it all lined up with a picture I'd refused to see. But once I started digging, there was no going back. I'd faced the ugly reality, hiring a private investigator to uncover every detail of her betrayal. And when I saw the photos, read the messages, and realized how little respect she actually had for me, I felt something inside me harden. I knew I couldn't just walk away and leave her with the satisfaction of a clean break. She had risked our family's future, ridiculed my loyalty, and shattered the trust that should have been the foundation of our marriage. And so, I took action. I didn't respond with blind rage. I responded with cold, calculated moves. I had her hidden savings frozen, set up a trust for our daughters, and shared the truth with her friends, her family, and even her colleagues. Bit by bit, her carefully crafted life came undone, her reputation and career crumbling as the reality of who she was came to light. Her attempts to salvage the situation were almost predictable. At first, she called, left voicemails, begged for understanding. She'd lost everything and wanted one last chance to save face. When that didn't work, she even tried to fight for custody of our daughters, desperate to regain control over anything in her life. But the courts saw through her, and I secured full custody, cutting off the last avenue she had to cling to the life she'd betrayed. With her out of town, the drama finally behind us, I could focus on the future. My daughters became my priority, my purpose, and together we began to rebuild. We created new routines, found joy in simple things, and gradually the weight of the past faded. I saw them blossom without the shadow of their mother's lies. I was no longer the man whose life was defined by his marriage to Ashley. I was their father, and that role meant more to me than anything. This entire ordeal taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. I'd learned not to ignore my instincts, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. I'd learned that loyalty is only as valuable as the person receiving it. And most importantly, I learned to value myself enough not to settle for a life built on deception. I'd always prided myself on being a good husband, but this time I had to be something more, a protector, a man who wouldn't let lies or betrayal define him. People would sometimes ask if I regretted any of it, if I would go back and erase the pain if I could. And honestly, the answer was no. The experience had shaped me, toughened me, and forced me to become someone who could stand alone and build a life on his own terms. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something I would have chosen, but in the end, it was a turning point I needed. Now, my focus is on my daughters and on the life we're building together. We're closer than ever, and they're growing up knowing the importance of honesty, integrity, and resilience. They know their father will protect them, will be there for them, and will always value the truth, no matter how hard it may be. And as for me, I'm at peace. I'm free from the weight of deception, free from the constant worry of what might be happening behind my back. I found strength, not in vengeance, but in the quiet resilience of moving forward. Ashley's memory, her betrayal, they're just pieces of a past life, fragments that no longer have power over me. I've finally let go, and for the first time, I feel like I'm living a life that's real, a life that's my own.